I have spent 3 hours, 14 minutes, and 44 seconds covering the world record history of a 3-minute long Flash game made by a concrete mixer salesman back in 2009. That's how long it took to cover 41 records set by 13 different runners over the span of 12 years. In the previous part, Red Ball Speedruns Beyond the 3-minute milestone, we explored how the time went from a 2:57 by Carmel, the first sub 3, to a 2:48 by Yak27, the first sub 250. This was made possible thanks to a few frame-dependent strategies that revolutionized the game, namely Bird 3, Max 6, Resetless 10, and P-Bird 11. However, these discoveries, enabled by a tool-assisted speedrun mod created in 2021, were widely believed to be almost all that the game had to offer in terms of viable real-time setups. Sure, the TAS of the game was a sub 230, and the segmented sum of best wasn't too far off, but the stuff that people could pull off in actual runs wasn't even close to matching those individual level accomplishments. However, if you glanced at the length of this video before clicking, then you know that we have a lot to discuss. For Red Ball's time to be pushed lower, more and more of these setups needed to be found and implemented in each level, replacing variable movement with binary outcomes. This quest for perfection was the next chapter in Red Ball's story, and indeed, just a month after the first sub 250, there was already a massive discovery that blew the game's ceiling wide open. Let's take a look. Six frame perfect inputs for around 2.5 seconds of time save. 4 years earlier, Ultra AUG discovered that a frame-perfect bounce pad jump could get you to the top of the level earlier, and world record contenders had been using the same route ever since. However, by thinking outside of the box, Not Very Good was able to combine the top and bottom routes through the level into something much greater, and it became known as Mug 7. A version of this hybrid route had already made its way into the TAS, but it required dozens of frame perfects. Now, it had a good chance of being incorporated into runs, especially after Bird Banana reduced the frame perfect count to 5. Former world record holder Norxor even managed to hit it twice in a row during practice later that month. However, with the visual cues for most inputs being quite awkward and easier time saves being present in the run, it wasn't worth going for yet. As is typical whenever a large barrier is shattered, the hype around top-level competition died down for a while after Yak's 248. It wasn't until May of 2022 that we would see another world record set, that being a 247.935 by Big Muck Muck. He missed the corner boost setup in level 4 to save a cycle on the Death Warp, but he still had the potential to break the record by a wide margin going into level 11 thanks to his excellent movement throughout the run. Unfortunately, he barely messed up the train strategy that he was going for. Back in June of 2021, Bird Banana had discovered a setup to complete the train level in under 16 seconds, collecting the flag before it went under the ground triangle. This required just a handful of frame perfects, but the unclear visual cues made it very difficult to pull off. Pierce and Insane Jetman later evolved the setup into a way to back up the traditional P-Bird strategy if you mistimed your first right press, coining it P-Jet. Even though this variant required an extra frame perfect, the more distinct visual cues for each input made it a lot easier, causing top runners to consider incorporating it. Muck Muck nailed the beginning of the setup to get past the large spikes, but he unfortunately mistimed this jump off the black platform, causing him to miss the corner boost. This tiny mistake cost him 2 seconds, but he still scraped by with a new world record. However, the most notable takeaway was that the sum of Muck Muck's best segments was a 237. Indeed, with Mug 7 and sub 16 train, a sub 240 was on the cusp of being feasible. Another discovery or two is likely all that was needed to piece together a viable route. But in the meantime, runners were focused on optimizing the strategies they already had at their disposal. On June 21st, Norxor made it to the late game on easy sub 250 pace, despite having lost 2 seconds from missing bird 3. After hitting resetless 10, his nerves shot through the roof. It all came down to level 11.
Oh, this is it! This is it, baby! This is it! 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 Oh my god, I've been waiting so fucking long, dude. I hate this game! Ah! I hate this game so much!
With a heart rate of 188, Norxor choked a sub 250 at the last possible moment. Regardless, in an era dominated by new age runners, Norxor proved that us old-timers still had the potential to make a splash. However, across the board, Red Ball still had a distinct lack of enthusiasm that was holding back its potential development. Thankfully, there was an event in the pipeline that sought to shake things up. Super Mario 63 is one of the most iconic Flash games ever created. An ambitious mashup of several Mario games in a single 2D package, it is a hallmark of the bustling creativity that the Flash platform provided. With a world record history that is almost as storied as Red Ball's, it only made sense for the two games communities to combine forces at some point. Dignity pitched the idea of having members from each community learn and speedrun the other game for a week to see what kind of time they could get. The top 3 runs for each game would be averaged together, and whatever community was closer to the world record from a percentage standpoint would win. The SM63 community had a lot of talent to draw from, most notably Verdict, who had the game's any percent world record by a mile. Verdict had also swept every world record in the original Vex trilogy, another set of Flash game platformers. It would be interesting to see what kind of times himself and other Mario 63 runners would be able to pull off in a limited time frame, June 24th to June 30th. Verdict speedran Red Ball for the first time on day 1, and then on day 3. In just 391 attempts, Verdict got a sub 3, a feat that had taken most runners thousands of tries and months of effort. Setting a time only 7% slower than Muck Muck's world record, this was equivalent to achieving a sub 645 in SM63 in the context of the competition. The best time that the Red Ball community ended up setting was a 753 by me. The competition was set to be an absolute blowout, but right before the final results were tallied, someone ended up lessening the blow. .244.484. Pogwin shattered the world record by 3.5 seconds, making it the largest record jump since Rary G's iconic 307. In the era of tool-developed setups, something like this was completely unprecedented. The run had almost no mistakes, and it even implemented a few new strategies. Firstly, he had a new level 6 setup called Star 6, which only required 2 frame perfects instead of 3. Not only was this strategy easier, it also completely removed the reaction time barrier that was present with Max 6, since the inputs came much later after the level transition. Next, he implemented a 4 frame perfect setup in level 7 that built up enough speed to skip the moving platforms without using the top route. This was around a second slower than Mug 7, but it proved to be a decent bit easier. The only mistake present in the run was missing the corner boost at the end of PJet 11, costing around 2 seconds. It is also worth noting that this was the first world record performed on the tournament edition of the game, which included an in-game timer and printed the date at the end of each run. The timer truncated to 3 decimal places, which is why the milliseconds of Pogwin's record read .483 instead of the properly rounded .484. While the timing of runs in the past had always been a bit ambiguous, since a 31 frames per second game does not cleanly fit into either a 30 FPS or 60 FPS video, any run performed on this version would have a 100% accurate retime. Some runners still preferred playing on the standard version, but the tournament edition would become more and more commonplace moving forward. Even factoring in Pogwin's improvement to the world record, the Super Mario 63 community still beat the Red Ball community by over 17% in the competition. Verdict had proved himself capable of being a top Red Ball runner, but only time would tell if he'd continue to push his personal best. After Pogwin's 244, another world record wasn't expected to happen anytime soon, and if one was, it would more than likely be by a tiny margin. Yak27 was attempting to reclaim his record with the same route as Pogwin, hoping to gain an edge by nailing PJet. He got a run that missed the corner boost during bottom route 7, which lost around 1.5 seconds. However, his levels 8 through 10 were optimal, and he had the ability to close the gap in 11.
Oh my god, it's that world record! It's that world record! It's that world record!
Yak27 beat the world record by just 6 frames. Though he was now back on top, he wanted to push the record further, as did the man that he just bested. Pogwin and Yak both knew that the current route could get a 242, but they both decided to implement Mug 7, pushing that potential even lower. In August, they were still far ahead of everyone else on the leaderboard, and the record was ready to fall at any moment. On August 15th, Yak had a run that missed Resetless 4, meaning that he had to wait to get the Death Warp on the back of the axe. He nailed Mug 7, but he unfortunately didn't press left for long enough before the Super Bounce, causing him to bonk the red wall. These two mistakes combined lost around 2.5 seconds, but since he had messed up a slower level 7 strategy in his world record, it was a bit of a wash. He took the lead after nailing a new strategy called Carline in level 8. With a frame-perfect left-to-right switch at the start of the level, and a jump on the ramp in a 2-frame window, Red Ball gets enough height to clear this barrier without slowing down, saving almost a second. He extended his lead after getting a near-perfect plunger jump, and a perfect PJet put him on pace for a 243.
What the fuck? What the fuck did I just do? Oh my god. Why did I choke 243? I don't know, but whatever. 0.09 PB. I love it.
That accidental corner jump in level 12 cost him the 243, but LiveSplit showed a new world record by 0.09 seconds. However, upon frame counting, the real time of the run was revealed to be 244.258, just a single frame faster. A week later, Pogwin had a run that got Star 6 on the second try and nailed all the other setups. However, since his hood launch and plunger were a bit less than optimal, the run clocked in at 244.065, another 6-frame improvement. So, despite 3 new world records being set in the past month, the time only dropped by 13 frames, or 0.419 seconds. It truly seemed like the game was running into a wall in terms of optimization, and hope of another sizable record ever being set was dwindling by the day. Yes, an optimal run with Pogwin and Yak's route could certainly get a 241, but it seemed like the road to get there would be extremely long. However, that's not the path that the record history ended up taking.
Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god! I'm unstoppable, man! I'm unstoppable! Yes! Let's go!
Well, that's more like it. In one run, Yak27 improved the world record by 6 times what the previous 3 records had combined. He nailed 2 corner jump, resetless 4, star 6, mug 7, resetless 10, and PJet 11 first try. He did omit Carline this time around, but he added in Cookie 3, which saves around 1/3 of a second over Bird 3. His hood launch and plunger weren't great, but he still achieved a run that was near the limit for this route. The implementation of another strategy or two is likely all that a sub 240 would need. He included a bold prediction in the description of the run.
3x will happen in 2022.
With only 4 months left in the year, it would almost certainly be himself or Pogwin claiming this final milestone should his prediction become a reality. Well, not so fast.
Not well back in.
By the time Yak set his 241, Verdict had shot up to 3rd place on the leaderboard with a 244.613, placing the top 3 in a dead heat. After Yak demolished the record, Verdict knew that he had to implement more strategies to increase his odds of breaking the record and possibly setting the first sub 240. He added Mug 7 to match Yak's route, and he brought Carline 8 back in from the sidelines. He also incorporated a setup in level 12 that Not Very Good used in a TAS back in July of 2022. With a frame-perfect jump release at the start, and a frame-perfect jump on the pillar, Red Ball can bounce in the spike pit without dying. By jumping after the recoil, Red Ball will avoid bonking into this ceiling, saving around half a second. Furthermore, by frame-perfectly jumping out of the tunnel, Red Ball will be set up for a corner jump off this stair, saving another full second. This strategy was the final piece in the puzzle of a viable 2-3x route, and since it was also the very last thing that had to be performed, it was aptly named 3x Choker. Verdict was the most prepared out of anyone to shatter the game's final 10-second barrier. And just a week after setting his 244, he had his first opportunity. Going into level 11, he was only 1.5 seconds behind his sum of best of 237.95. With P-Jet and 3x Choker, this could easily be the one. Let's see what Verdict made of it.
Awesome. Yay, 243, yippee! The 3x Joker didn't choke the 3x. It happened.
By releasing Jump a frame early at the start, Verdict ended up dying in the spike pit, choking 3x Choker. He also flubbed his second attempt, requiring him to implement a frame-dependent backup to still get the corner jump on the stairs. Despite the heartbreaking failure, the run still had significant context in the overall quest for perfection with Red Ball speedruns. Never in the game's history had a top-level runner been able to play the first 11 levels of the game anywhere close to within 1.5 seconds of their theoretical cap. In fact, RareEG's 307, a run that was hailed as being essentially perfect for the strategies used, was still the closest a world record had ever gotten to the runner's sum of best, over 3 seconds away. At this point, every single level in the game involved a frame-dependent strategy except for 1, 5, and 9. And since level 1 just involves a single jump over this barrier, and level 5 just requires a jump up this slope and then to the flag, the only level that fully relied on non-fixed movement was level 9. While it had taken a while for runners to master this new era of Red Ball speedrunning, it finally seemed like the end game had arrived. If you wanted to set a top level time, you simply selected a frame-dependent setup for each level, added the times that they yielded, left a second or two of wiggle room for the bits that were still variable, and that is the time that you could expect to get. All that it came down to was whether you hit all of the frame perfects or not, of which the sub 240 route had roughly 23. And on the subject of frame perfect counts, every single time that I mention them, I get plenty of people commenting the exact same thing.
Are you serious? Geometry Dash has levels with over 100 frame perfects. Hitting 23 is so easy.
Alright, calm down. Give me a few minutes to explain why analyzing the difficulty of frame perfects isn't that simple. Red Ball is a 31 frames per second game, meaning that each frame should last for about 32 milliseconds. In theory, hitting 23 frame-perfect inputs in a row with that window shouldn't be too bad. In fact, here's a video of me hitting 23 frame-perfects in a row on my first try. Yeah, every input may have had equal spacing with a distinct visual cue, but that was still 23 inputs, each with a 32 millisecond window. Now, here's me hitting 200 frame perfects in a row. So I guess I must be ready to beat Tidal Wave. Alright, so the context behind frame perfect inputs clearly matters when determining how difficult they are. So let me break down the factors that make frame perfects in Red Ball much different from other games. First of all, Red Ball has 4 buttons to keep track of, while the examples that I have shown thus far require only 1. The more inputs that you have to keep track of, the harder your job is going to be. Next up, you have the impact of rhythm. Generally, the more rhythm-based the inputs are, the easier they are to perform. Even complex click patterns, as they are called in Geometry Dash, can produce a distinct rhythm that can become more and more refined through practice. With many of the setups in Red Ball, the frame-perfect inputs can take place seconds apart from each other, yielding no such pattern. Rhythm is also related to the audio and visual cues that the game provides. For my A Dance of Fire and Ice demonstration, I just had to hit a button with the consistent beat of a metronome. It doesn't get any easier than that. Even without audio, there's a very distinct visual cue to look out for: the ball overlapping the path. With the balls moving extremely fast, this only happens for a brief moment in time. Compare that to the first right press in P-Jet 11. This is the frame before, this is the frame that you need to hit it, and this is the frame after. There is almost no distinction. Even with Geometry Dash, the visual change over the same time frame is often immense in comparison. Regardless, the best proof that frame perfect counts aren't a universal measure of difficulty comes from the results of people who have actually played multiple frame-dependent games at a high level. Thankfully, we have a great example of this, since one of the best Geometry Dash players, Trick, managed to get a mid 456 in Super Mario Bros., a feat which requires roughly 20 frame perfects at 60 frames per second. On paper, this is so much easier than his completion of Tidal Wave that he should have been able to just boot up the game and get it on like his 10th try or something. But no, it actually took him weeks of practice and dozens of hours of attempts to pull off. Don't get me wrong, achieving a mid 456 that fast is still extremely impressive and practically unheard of. But it didn't happen instantly, like this graph would lead you to believe. Going even further, there is something baked into Flash Player itself that makes frame-perfect inputs less consistent than they otherwise should be. If you have seen my Red Ball TAS Explained video, then you should be aware that the time that each frame takes up is not the same. The frame rate that is specified for any Flash game is simply a target that it is trying to hit. In other words, frames can be shorter or longer than 32 milliseconds, so long as the average frame rate comes out to around 31. On good machines, this error is usually just a few milliseconds or so. However, upon opening Adobe Scout, an official tool for profiling the performance of Flash Player, the truth is revealed to be much more severe. On my computer, every 15 to 16 frames, Flash throws in a frame that is half the length, compensating for all of the other frames being a bit longer than they should be. As you can imagine, if you need to perform a frame-perfect input on any of these half frames, you are far more likely to miss it. And on slower machines like my laptop, the spikes and dips are even worse. To demonstrate how bad this is, I will examine the exact input and frame time data when performing Resetless 4 on both my desktop and my laptop for 5 runs each. You can see that jump must be pressed on frame 149, released on frame 150, and then pressed again on frame 152. However, if we extend the exact input timings from the first trial to each of the others, you can see that only 5 of the remaining 9 would have succeeded. Yes, this is a small sample size, but the overall lesson here is that a certain level of randomness is involved with almost every single frame-perfect input in Red Ball. We will discuss how this impacts the human limit of the game later in this video, but just know for now that any frame-perfect count that I list in this video is not directly comparable to other games. Now, with that out of the way, let's merge back on the road to 2-3x. Though Verdict was still quite a bit behind Yak, his 243 proved that he was likely the favorite to be the first to get a sub 240. He just needed to get that pace again, and then hit 3x choker. How hard could it possibly be? Well, the very same day, he got a run that missed the first frame perfect of Cookie 3. So he reset the level to get it on his second try. Similarly, he messed up the left-right switch at the start of Car Line 8 and had to quickly reset to fix it. Another second loss to his sum of best. Even though 3x was dead, he still continued the run since the world record was barely within his grasp. Plunger? Check. Resetless 10? Check. P-Jet? Check. All he needed was 3x choker, and the record would be his.
Yay! Oh my god, I missed the world record by like 0.1 second. That's so cool.
Well, he messed up the start, but he nailed the backup to still get the corner jump off the stairs. Still, he found himself 4 frames off the record. At this point, the only people who had ever gotten a sub 250 were Yak, Pogwin, Verdict, Muck Muck, and Carmel. Though there was obviously a clear time gap between the top 3 and everyone else, Muck Muck wasn't as active as he used to be, and Carmel had long since left the game behind. There were just 3 guys that had a chance of breaking the milestone, and it seemed pretty set in stone that no one else would get to their level before the glass was finally shattered. However, that certainty was eroded the very next day as another sub 250 came from an unlikely source.
Wait, what? Yes! Yes! Oh my god! Oh my god, it's over!
To explain why on earth Nifsky, the greatest Super Mario Bros. Speedrunner to ever live, set a 4th place run in Red Ball out of seemingly nowhere, let's wind the clock back to January 2021, when the rise of Red Ball began. As thousands of speedrunners flooded to the Red Ball community, largely as a result of my videos being thrust into the good graces of the YouTube algorithm, Nifsky was one of the runners who decided to give the game a shot. On January 19th, he followed the beginner speedrun tutorial that I had created to get a sub 4-minute time on his first day. This eventually led to many other Super Mario Bros. Speedrunners trying the game out, including Alden Speedruns, Jeremy MKW, Sawyer0622, Hitscrits, and more. Miniland, who had the world record in Super Mario Bros. At the time, even popped into the Red Ball Discord for a little while, though he wasn't interested in playing the game. Red Ball had so many new players that near the start of February, it had over double Super Mario Bros. Active player count on speedrun.com. While the 2 games were very different in their design, one was a physics sandbox, while the other was a fixed-speed platformer, they were similar in the fact that they were short, easy-to-pick-up speed games with no RNG. Well, aside from Spike Glitch, since this was the pre-deterministic patch era. Nifsky was obviously capable of getting much more than a 353, and on February 18th, he improved his PB to a 327. For the next 2 months, he put his full focus towards grinding Super Mario Bros., culminating with him setting the first 454, shattering the game's final second barrier. He eventually found his way back to Red Ball, and in June of 2021, he hit the infamous sub-20 train strategy for the first time, using the newly found P-Bird setup. 4 months later, he managed to set a 317.065, a good time that would have flown largely under the radar had it not been for him hitting sub-20 train in the run. This actually set the record for the slowest personal best with a first try sub-20 train. Surprisingly, it wasn't until June 20th, 2022 that he came back again, setting a 311.645 and a 305.968 on the same day. The keen-eyed among you may have noticed that despite 1.5 years passing, Nifsky's attempt counter sat at just 544. Nifsky found massive success by practicing way more than doing attempts, the same approach that he took to Super Mario Bros. As a hint to any up-and-coming speedrunners out there, in platformer games without RNG, this is always a winning strategy. Nifsky's approach would continue to pay dividends, as that same night...
Oh my god. There's no way, dude. There's no way. Wait! Yes! Oh my god! Yes! I'm done with this game forever, bro. I'm freaking done. I'm done. I'm done. It's over! Holy cow!
Nifsky got a sub 3 in just 602 attempts, clutching it out with a gold level 11 and a gold level 12. This was the record for the least attempts to get a sub 3 until Verdict did it in 391 a week later during the Super Mario 63 crossover event. In the span of just 8 hours, Nifsky pushed his personal best from a 317 to a 259. Something that was completely unheard of and almost unimaginable until he somehow made it happen. As you heard from that pop-off, Nifsky genuinely thought that he was never going to touch the game again. But Red Ball has a unique ability to drag people back in. In late August, Nifsky got a sudden spike in motivation to go for a sub 250. On August 30th, he jumped all the way down to a 252.903.
Yes! Yes! Oh my god, that could have got 4x. That literally could have got 2 4x, I think. If I went for P-Jet, I'm pretty sure.
Indeed, P-Jet and a better level 12 is all that he needed for the 4x. 2 days later, he got this.
Yeah, this run sucks now. Not 4x though. Oh my god! Are you kidding me? I'm getting 4x, bro.
Nifsky started live streaming on his alternate account, and 11 attempts later, he had a run that was a bit behind going into level 12. 3x Choker could have granted him another PB, but he didn't know it or the backup.
I don't know a setup. Screw it. Oh my, what? Is that it? Is that a PB? No way!
A week later, he was easily on 4x pace going into level 11, and he opted to do P-Bird instead of P-Jet since he thought that he had enough wiggle room. However, he forgot that he had done the setup-less stair jump in his personal best, and he ended up coming up just short. But as you saw earlier, he managed to get the 247.871 later that same day. With how fast Nifsky had been able to improve each time that he returned to the game, it truly seemed like he may position himself as a 3x contender. However, he again stated at the end of the run,
I'm done, dude. I'm done. I'm done with Red Ball. I'm done with Red Ball, baby.
whether he was being truthful this time had yet to be seen. Still, Nifsky's emphatic return to the game had finally motivated another high-profile Mario speedrunner to give the game a shot.
In Red Bull speedrunning, beating the game in under 3 minutes is the benchmark for becoming a good player, and the time has a long history of grueling grinds. It's not uncommon for people to take tens of thousands of attempts to get a sub 3, but I had a different goal in mind: to get a sub 3 in the lowest amount of attempts ever.
185.
Let's go, dude! Sub 3, 185 attempts. Quickest ever, by a long shot.
On September 19th, Miniland managed to get a sub 3 in just 185 attempts, demolishing Verdict's record. Believe it or not, it only took him 17 attempts to get to level 11 on sub 3 pace for the first time. Again, an experienced Mario 1 speedrunner had found enormous success by applying a practice-heavy approach to Red Ball speedruns. And by heavy, I mean that Miniland spent an entire week practicing the game before doing any attempts. Miniland estimates that his ratio of time spent practicing versus doing runs ended up being around 90 to 10. However, it wasn't just the sheer amount of time spent practicing that brought him success. What you practice and how you practice it is even more important. Miniland made sure to laser in on the most difficult pieces of the run, namely Cookie 3, Resetless 4, 8 Cycle Skip, and P-Bird, utilizing save states, the frame offset display, and the heads-up display mod to make his practice as efficient and effective as possible. In the description of his run, Miniland stated,
I'll be going for a time in the 2-minute 40-second range, which would place me comfortably in the top 10, and who knows what will happen after that.
At this point, Red Ball speedrunning seemed like it had all the momentum in the world, with multiple people actively gunning for the game's most formidable milestone. Given all the hype, the community felt like it was a great time to organize a special event to showcase everyone's talent. Welcome to Red Ball Break the Record. On October 1st and 2nd, the Red Ball community ran an event that featured several top runners aiming to beat the 12 levels world record. The talent included the Egglet, Pierce, Norxor, Sprong, Muck, Pogwin, Yak, and, of course, Verdict. For 8 hours each day, the runners could put up as many attempts as they wanted, with the goal of setting the best time possible. The 4 players with the best runs during the event would get a portion of the prize pool, with $100 reserved for anyone who set the first 2 3x during the stream. This kind of event is exactly what the tournament edition of the game was made for. The built-in timer avoids having to retime runs, and the date display ensures that nobody is streaming pre-recorded attempts. While the event was a success, it's hard to say much about it, since only a small amount of video has survived. The most notable thing that happened was Verdict getting a world record paced run into level 12 that ended as a 242.129, just short again. Soon after, he managed to set a 243.774, which he evidently wasn't very happy about. Still, he ended up finishing first place in the event by a mile, clearly cementing himself as the frontrunner to set the first sub 240. Off the heels of this successful and entertaining showcase, I started planning another Red Ball Break the Record that would feature a larger prize pool, more runners and commentators, and a more professional broadcast. While the event was set to be much shorter, just 5 hours instead of 16, the greater presence of hype and talent meant that a new world record could easily be set. Well, on the very first run of the event,
That's a
255. Dang, let's go.
258.
Verdict got a 255 on demand, and Pierce also managed to get a sub 3. Viewers were certainly in for a treat, and it didn't take long for Verdict to move the goalposts further.
Very, very good.
And just barely not getting
And
4x.
251 from Verdict. Very, very nice.
Around the 2-hour mark, the top of the event leaderboard was starting to get a bit crowded. However, when Verdict got an opportunity to pull away,
Oh wait, he is on
on
4x
pace.
game.
Wait, no
Hold
way. Let's go. Get
And
3x
That's Joker,
Joker.
that's the first 4x.
There we go.
The
First
first
4x
4x of the event.
after being the only person to set a sub 250 in the first Break the Record, Verdict became the first to do it here, a time that likely could have won him the event. However, there was still 3 hours left for runs, and his aspirations were much larger than a first place spot. Here's a run that he got less than an hour later.
Oh my gosh. No
That's
way.
it?
No
That's
way.
it.
No way.
No
Dude,
way.
dude. Oh my gosh,
Oh,
no.
man. Still
no,
some
we
20
missed
though.
it. Okay, it can still. Oh my
Oh
gosh.
man.
Low 4x, low 4x.
Oh my gosh.
Come on, Bert.
Ah,
Not going
quite.
for it.
Yeah, you
Not
nailed.
going for it.
Not going for it.
But-
Still so
oh
awesome.
My goodness. 243.55.
243.55.
Wow.
What a time.
What
in
a
the
run.
The man had a 3x paced run past the large spikes in level 11, but he didn't get the corner boost. He didn't quite nail the starting inputs for 3x choker, and he just took the ending safe instead of resetting at the checkpoint flag to attempt the backup. 243.516. This is the best run that anyone ended up setting during the event, meaning that Verdict was in first place for the entire thing. Sprong ended up being the only other runner to even get a sub 250, further cementing Verdict's perceived dominance over the category, despite him still not having the world record. Well, the next weekend, he had an excellent opportunity to fix that. The strategy you just saw is known as 9x3, a 4-frame perfect setup to jump off the plunger a whole cycle early. Since he got the star 6 inputs on his second try, Verdict needed that to stay on 3x pace. Let's watch the rest.
Optimal drives, my power. So 30% off on Amazon for the next 2 hours. Alright, well this isn't 3x, so that kind of sucks.
The ending of P-Jet trolled him yet again. But he still clutched 3x Choker to claim a new world record of 240.355. Now, it may look like Verdict was pretty far away from collecting the flag before it went underground, but Red Ball's hitbox is often larger than it should be due to a certain box-in-box phenomenon. By replaying his inputs as a TAS, we find that, on this frame, Verdict was 0.0017 units away from contacting the flag. We can convert this value to find that the gap which separated Verdict from Red Ball Glory was around 1/7 of a pixel at 1080p. This man could not catch a break. Still, Verdict continued doing attempts for the rest of October and all through November, but he couldn't quite close anything out. He even had another run make it to level 12 on 3x pace that missed 3x Choker. It wasn't until December that the top of the leaderboard saw any kind of movement. You'd probably expect Yak or Pogwin to be the one to finally shake up the race to 3x, but that momentum ended up coming from a very unlikely source. Remember when Miniland said that he would go for a sub 250 at some point in the description of his sub 3? Well, he ended up achieving that goal just 8 days later. Indeed, this 246.645 launched him to 4th place, just ahead of Nifsky. The run was nearly flawless for the route he was going for, which included a train strategy that saved half a second over P-Jet. On paper, this strategy was more difficult since it had 5 frame perfects instead of 4, but for whatever reason, Miniland and Nifsky found it to be a good bit easier. Since the Super Mario Bros. Speedrunners had found more success with it compared to everyone else, it was coined SMB11. Miniland stated that he could comfortably quit the game after this run and still be satisfied, but we all know how that usually ends up going. Towards the end of November, Miniland had a sudden burst in motivation to hunt for the first sub 240. He spent some time learning and practicing strategies from Verdict's 3x route, including Mug 7, Carline 8, and 3x Choker. However, he decided to switch out Cookie 3 with a setup for Taz 3, adding 2 frame perfects to save 0.8 seconds. Taz 3 involves getting a good boost off the platform itself instead of from the back corner, something which is extremely precise and almost impossible to do without a frame-dependent setup. It actually has a rich history dating back to early 2021, with Insane Jetman having made a 20-minute long video documenting the strategy's discovery by Bird Banana and his own attempts to replicate it in real time without a frame-dependent setup. With the extra wiggle room that Taz 3 provided, Miniland also subbed out 9x3 for an easier strategy called EasyJet 9, which avoids the plunger entirely and loses around a second. With his new route prepared, Miniland was ready for runs, and on November 30th, he got a 243.645, moving him to 3rd place ahead of Pogwin. And then, on December 4th,
Oh my god, 2nd place! 2nd place! 2nd place!
the race to 3x had suddenly turned into a dead heat between Verdict and Miniland. The only reason that this run wasn't a 3x is because Miniland messed up Resetless 4, losing around 2 seconds. Miniland was rapidly improving, and a sub 240 was likely to be his in a matter of days. If Verdict wanted to be the first, he had to act now. After spending several months just barely coming up short, it was time for him to show off his full potential. Let's see what happened the next day.
Wow. I should have done Carline, I guess.
Well, that missed cycle skip and a bad hood launch in 8 was practically a death sentence. Even a perfect ending with 9x3, resetless 10, PJet 11, and 3x choker wouldn't be enough for the sub 240. That is, unless he had a trick up his sleeve.
Guys, hold up. Hold up. Hold up. Hold up. Hold up. Wait a minute. I got something. I got something.
I gotta hit the gritty, gotta hit the gritty.
It was a really bad level 8, but SMB 11 saves the day, I guess. I love SMB 11.
When it mattered most, Verdict clutched up. The man pulled out a strategy that seemed forbidden for us normal speedrunners to use, and it saved his run. I guess his experience with Super Mario 63 really did pay off. The accomplishment brought much celebration, and Yak's prediction that a sub 240 would happen in 2022 had become a reality. And, as it turned out, another monumental moment for the Red Ball community was just around the corner. So yeah, the day after Red Ball's last 10-second barrier was finally shattered, I hit 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. I was able to celebrate the occasion with dozens of others on Red Ball Online, a multiplayer mod of the game that was created by SmartCube, Sage, and I'm Purple. Fittingly, I hit 100k just as I finished Train, the level that was responsible for the video that thrust my channel into the spotlight back in 2021. I spent most of the stream running simultaneous races with everyone for fun, and included in that swarm of balls was Nifsky, who hadn't done attempts for a few months. However, for the past week, he had put in some practice with the newer strategies, namely Taz 3, EasyJet 9, SMB 11, and 3x choker. My celebration stream was the last bit of motivation that he needed to finally return to doing runs, and he hit the ground running right after the stream ended. And just 30 minutes into his attempt session...
No way! No way!
No fucking way, dude.
Yes! Yes! Let's freaking go!
This dude is a machine. Yeah, he took quick resets for Taz 3 and Star 6, he had a less than optimal hood launch in level 8, and he hit the backup for 3x choker. But everything else was flawless. This was a good first step towards a sub 240, but he still had a long grind ahead of him if he chose to take that path. I mean, he was still in 5th place after all. Nifsky could have easily called it a night there. But for whatever reason, he decided to keep going. And it's certainly a good thing that he did.
my god! Oh my god! Oh my god! Yes! 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 Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god! I'm gonna black out! I'm gonna black out! I'm gonna black out, dude! There's no way, dude! This cannot be real!
Alright, so remember earlier when I said that it was almost unimaginable that Nifsky had improved his PB from a 317 to a 259 in a span of just 8 hours? That doesn't even hold a candle to the miracle that he pulled off during this attempt session. He demolished the world record by over 2 seconds, leaping all the way from 5th place to 1st. He had improved his PB by over 10 seconds in a span of less than 2.5 hours. The cherry on top is that he could have still gotten the record without 3x choker, but he went for it anyways, making it the largest world record jump since Pogwin's 244.484. It's no wonder that Nifsky cited this run as possibly being the biggest fluke in his speedrunning career. This was the first time in Red Ball speedrunning history that someone had made it to the precipice of full game perfection. Aside from getting an even better hood launch than the already excellent one that Nifsky got, you could not improve this run without incorporating harder setups into the route. The good news is that there were still a few more strategies on the sidelines waiting to be thrown in. We had already seen Carline 8 and 9x3 used in previous world records, leaving at least a second and a half of time save on the table. However, that just wasn't enough to compel people to keep going for the record, and incorporating both setups would come at the cost of 6 frame perfects. Red Ball desperately needed another strategy to push its human ceiling a bit higher and give any record hopeful runners enough wiggle room to justify going for it. Thankfully, on December 19th, that need was filled, as Carline 8 would become supercharged. With 3 frame perfect, 1 frame long jumps, Red Ball could get an insane launch off the tip of the car. However, unlike most frame dependent strategies in the game, all 3 of these inputs had pretty distinct visual cues, and if you missed any one of them, you could usually still get a decent hood launch and continue your run. Miniland immediately took notice of the strategy, and he started getting the hang of it pretty quick. Funnily enough, he began drawing some similarities between this setup and a strategy known as Plate 1 in Super Mario Bros. It had a similar position in the run, and the left to right inputs at the start of the level were somewhat similar to the perfect fast acceleration that Plate 1 required. Miniland suggested that the strategy be called Plate 8 as a result, and it instantly stuck. Miniland titled his first perfect Plate 8 a sneak peek of the next Red Ball world record, indicating that he had clear intentions of claiming it with this strategy. That very same day, he had a run that got the Carline portion of Plate 8 but failed the ending, still placing him ahead of the record. He extended his lead to 1.1 seconds by nailing 9x3. He got resetless 10 but had a slow ending, shrinking the lead to 0.2. Still, he had just gotten the best ever exits out of levels 8, 9, and 10, and he readied himself for SMB 11.
No!
So, Miniland clearly pressed the up button, as indicated by his input display, but Red Ball just didn't jump. Unfortunately, most Flash games, including Red Ball, pull inputs in a flawed manner that makes this possible to happen. If an input is pressed and released within the span of the same frame, the game won't register the input at all. This jump in SMB 11 must be a single frame long, so Miniland is aiming to press the button for around 32 milliseconds to give him the best chance of having his input pulled just a single time. However, this is extremely difficult to do, and even if you were a robot that could press a button for 32 milliseconds every single time, it still wouldn't be 100% consistent. Because of all the frame time shenanigans that I mentioned earlier, a perfect 32 millisecond input still has a chance of being pulled for 0 frames or 2 frames. The same day, he got a run that hit all the frame perfects in Plate 8 except for the last, placing him a second ahead of the record. Again, he had the fastest ever exit from level 8, but failed 9 times 3. The next day, he finally managed to hit all of Plate 8 in a run, but 9 times 3 eluded him yet again. For the rest of December, Miniland kept pouring in attempts, steadily making progress towards the record. And on the 28th, he had another opportunity at level 11.
Ooh, that's it, that's it, that's it, that's it, that's it. Oh my god. I just first tried that. That's it, that's it, that's it. Oh, wait, what?
Come on.
What? What? I got screwed! I got 3x choker set up and it didn't work. I got a fake one.
Miniland had a 3x choker attempt that looked almost exactly like the real thing, but sadly, it was a counterfeit. After some investigating, he found that this can only happen if the jump off the pillar is a single frame long, so he made sure to always do a 2 or 3 framer in the future. Miniland continued to post steady progress through February of the next year, even streaming on Nifsky's alternate Twitch account a few times. While he had achieved various best exit records, he still hadn't closed out a sub 240. He was overdue for a massive PB, and he got confident enough to stream 235 attempts to his main Twitch account. 235 was the upper limit of the route he was going for, which, I'll remind you, was Nifsky's 237 route with 9 more frame perfects added from Plate 8 and 9 times 3. It was incredibly unlikely that Miniland would be able to jump straight to a time like that, but he was certainly capable of achieving it a few personal bests down the road. Well, on his 3rd main channel stream, he finally got his first sub 240.
That's 235.9, I'm pretty sure. Please. Yo! We did, wait, 17. I'm so happy, bro. I got 235. That is exactly what I wanted. Exactly.
The man skipped straight to the 235, getting it by a single frame. A quick reset at the start of 8 to retry the left-right inputs was the only mistake in the entire run. 2 corner jump, Taz 3, Resetless 4, Star 6, Mug 7, Plate 8, 9 times 3, Resetless 10, SMB 11, and 3x choker. It all came together. Funnily enough, the top of the Red Ball leaderboard was now almost identical to the top of the Super Mario Bros. Leaderboard. Their hostile takeover was now complete. With the reservoir of RTA viable setups having finally dried up, Miniland's record stood and stood and stood. Eventually, it became the first world record since Flowers 404 back in 2016 to stand for over a year. Verdict continued doing attempts from time to time, eventually getting a 237 and some 17 levels records, but the top 2 spots on the 12 levels leaderboard still eluded him. Though top level play was expected to remain stagnant for even longer, as I have said many times throughout this video, Red Ball has a unique ability to draw people back to the game, even those who have claimed to be completely done with it. A small spark is often all it takes to reignite that passion. And for me, creating the 3-minute milestone video was exactly that. But yeah, for the past month, I've kind of been secretly practicing all of the world record strats for Red Ball, getting pretty consistent at each one. And I'm at the point now where I'm pretty confident that I could potentially fluke the record on any given run. And I have it on pretty good authority that other people may be returning soon as well. So I'm not going for this uncontested. For almost a month, I had been practicing the game in secret, equipping myself with the tools that I needed to contest for the record. I kept track of my consistency with each strategy on a spreadsheet, which highlighted my weak spots and estimated how many attempts it would take me to beat the record. The only difference between my route and Minilands was RBZ9, a new setup for level 9 that was a good bit easier than 9x3 without losing any time. I had done a handful of attempts offline as a sanity check, and I ended up getting an optimal 1 through 6 and 1 through 7 pretty quickly. I didn't want to place too much pressure on myself until I was truly ready to dive in. So the only person that I kept in the know about what I was up to was Nifsky. At this point, the two of us had become close friends, and I started motivating him to return to the game as well during my preparation. And on March 30th, he sent me the exact message that I'd been hoping for. We agreed that some friendly competition would be a great way to motivate each other, and I finally made my announcement. The race to world record was officially on. With my personal best still being the famous 255, I had a lot of catching up to do. On day 3 of attempts, I got my first sub 250. That's my first 4x, I guess. Though I had beaten my PB by 6 seconds, the pop-off was almost non-existent because I was still so far off of my goal. As I got distracted by school, my grind started tapering off, while Nifsky went full steam ahead. Though our routes were almost identical, he included some additional frame perfects at the end of levels 7 and 10 that saved around half a second combined, giving himself 234 potential. Since he also went for optimal jumps in levels 1 and 5 as well, this meant that every single piece of his route was entirely frame dependent except for the plunger jump in level 9. Aside from any quick resets, it was essentially all or nothing. On April 8th, he had a run with a second try left-right switch in level 8, matching Miniland in that regard. His additional optimizations meant that he was still on record pace, but after nailing the first jump of Resetless 10, he somehow missed the pillar. This came as no fault of his own. He buffered right through the level transition, but the game didn't pick up the input until frame 2, throwing off the setup. This has a chance of happening whenever the level transition lands on one of those half frames that I mentioned earlier. Shoutouts again to Flash for being a technological dumpster fire. Despite having to take a costly reset there, he still finished the run a few frames ahead of his PB. The next day, he got a run that missed the 4th frame perfect in plate 8, causing a 1.3 second time loss. After a perfect levels 9, 10, and 11, he barely messed up the start of 3x choker and had to hit the backup.
No way! No way!
Since this was another small PB, he was able to keep his composure and lock in on 17 levels. At this point, the world record in that category was a 404, exceptionally close to that 4-minute milestone. This was the final minute barrier that the game had to offer, and since Nifsky's level 12 split was over 7 seconds ahead of the record, he was easily on pace for it.
No, bro. Okay, whatever. Dude! Yes! Yes! Let's go! Let's go!
The missed jump from the moving platform in level 13 killed the sub 4, but he still set a new 17 levels world record of 401.387. Knowing that a 12 levels world record could happen any run now, he began streaming attempts to his main Twitch account the next day. While Nifsky demonstrated incredible consistency on his first and second streams, he wasn't quite able to put together the run that he was looking for. However, perfection can only elude this man for so long. Here's what happened on day 3.
There's no way. Oh my god, there's no way. Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh! Oh my god! Oh my god! No freaking way! Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh. What? What? No. No, this is not real. I'm gonna faint. I'm gonna faint. I'm gonna faint. Oh my god. Oh my god! What? 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 Oh my god! Oh my god, that's a perfect run. That is a perfect run. I can't beat that, dude.
While Nifsky's 237.710 had come extremely close to perfection for that route, this masterpiece was the real deal. You could not beat this run by more than a few frames without faster setups. Nifsky got the fastest ever exit from level 8, and he never looked back. This route had over 35 frame perfects, and he hit every single one first try. The quest to perfect a full game route developed from the task hack had concluded. Knowing that it was impossible for me to beat this run with my current strategies, I threw in the towel on the most lopsided world record battle in Red Ball history. Though this run could have easily demolished the 17 levels record, he understandably struggled to keep his composure through that pop-off. There's a reason that the last time that someone got both records in the same run was Jonas's back in 2021. Nifsky had no interest in running 17 levels on its own, meaning that the door to claim the first sub 4 was still wide open. So that's the goal that I shifted my gears towards. On the road there, I got my first 3x in 12 levels, I scored 3rd place with a 236, I set the 17 levels record with a 4 flat, and I choked a sub 4 to the final frame dependent input in the run. On May 5th, the legend Rare EG had tuned into my stream for the first time since my return to the game. Fittingly, 4 runs later, I got my consolation prize. While my story had certainly found a happy ending, Verdict had yet to find his. The game had cheated him time and time again, but he was persistent, still pouring in runs whenever he had the time. At this point, all he wanted was to beat Miniland's time in 12 levels, a goal that had eluded him for almost a year and a half. Well, on July 29th,
Yo, no way, yo, no way, yo, 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 yo.
That's not quite what he was after, but beating my 17 levels PB by a single frame was certainly welcome. Now, here's what happened on August 6th.
Don't get excited, that's not it. That's only sub 20. Oh well, it's a free X. Yay, free X. Oh yeah! Oh yeah! That's right, baby, I still got it in the bag. I still got it in the bag!
A sizable 17 levels record. This man was on a roll. He just needed to translate that success over to the first 12 levels as well. Thankfully, the very next day,
there's a lot that I could say here. But I don't think there's much that needs to be said.
he achieved his goal by a single frame. After a year and a half of just barely coming up short, Verdict was completely overcome with emotion. His journey was over. Verdict was finally free from Red Ball. And that leaves Nifsky's 234.613 in 12 levels, and Verdict's 357.452 in 17 levels as the current world records in the game. It took over 4 hours of scripted commentary to get here, but we have finally arrived at where the game may remain for a good while. However, that doesn't mean that this is the end of Red Ball's story. Though sub 240 was widely believed to be the game's final 10-second barrier for a few years, we have thankfully learned enough about Red Ball to know that there is still more to be done. Sub 230 is possible, and I wholeheartedly believe that an extremely dedicated speedrunner will accomplish it one day. However, to give you a sense of how far off we still are, let me show you one of the strategies that you'd need to implement to make it happen. With 18 frame perfects, you can escape the opening tunnel early and complete the level almost 3 seconds faster than SMB11. The movement at the beginning of the level is so precise that you have to keep the game at a pixel-precise window size to make it work. What you witnessed there is just a taste of the mastery that speedrunners have managed to achieve on an individual level basis. Many other crazy strategies that were once thought to be impossible in a real-time setting have been pulled off, such as this insane death warp in level 9 that involves inverting the plunger to get it in just the right position. The sum of every individual level world record, the combination of thousands of hours of effort, comes out to 220.065 for 12 levels and 329.516 for 17 levels. The tool-assisted speedrun clocks in just 13 and 14 frames faster respectively. 12 out of 17 levels in the TAS have been tied to the frame, and there's a good chance that the human sum of best will come to match it one day. While the crazy accomplishments people have made from an individual level standpoint are extremely impressive in their own right, it doesn't necessarily translate over to full game success. Attempting a single level of the game tens of thousands of times is completely different from tackling the whole thing, and there are plenty of runners that are great at one but not the other. If you look at the 10 best individual level players and the 10 best full game players, only 5 make an appearance on both lists. While the human sum of best certainly proves that the game has a long theoretical runway, it simultaneously shows that a sub 220 is not possible, at least using the versions of Flash Player that we currently have available. Let's generously assume that Flash's inconsistent frame times result in 5% of otherwise successful frame-perfect inputs failing. To get a sub 220, you need to hit over 190 in a row. Even if all those inputs would have worked given consistent frame times, you'd only have a 0.006% chance of all of them succeeding. Thankfully, some recent developments have helped improve consistency and level the playing field. Firstly, I discovered that the minimum key press length of certain keyboards could be modified. You see, all keyboards have a built-in debounce time to ensure that single key presses aren't registered as multiple, usually defaulting to 5 milliseconds. By changing it to Red Ball's median frame time, 33 milliseconds, it makes one-frame inputs a lot more consistent. Then, a few months ago, I confirmed that some older Flash Player versions yield more consistent frame times in the Red Ball games compared to newer ones, especially on slower machines. I spent days tracking down the optimal version, which came in the form of an ancient internet plugin, and then developed my own program to use it without having to boot up Internet Explorer. As a bonus, I was able to add custom features that the stock Flash Player lacked, making it a win-win. Finally, we've also found a way to prevent second frame accelerations, which have killed many world record paced runs, from ever happening again by shortening the key repeat delay below the normal range in Windows. These recent developments have been beneficial to Red Ball and the Flash game speedrunning scene as a whole. We can only hope that one day we'll have a way to play a 15-year-old 600 kilobyte game without performance issues to push its potential as low as possible. But for now, this is where our story ends. From casual playthroughs, to initial optimization, to movement mastery, to the quest for sub 3, to the entrance of frame-dependent setups, and finally, the quest for perfection, this game has certainly been through a lot. Of all the tens of thousands of Flash games that made their way to the internet, who could have known that this is the one that would arguably hit it the biggest from a modern speedrunning standpoint? Let's just hope that there is still more history yet to be written. Thanks for following the complete story of Red Ball speedruns.